I'm Kate Worm talking with you today about the Skipper brush by famous watercolorist Skip Lawrence. And Cheap Joe sells these brushes. They are ox hair, nickel ferrule, and wooden handle, short handle. They come in 1 inch, 1.5, and 2 inches. This is a brand new 1-inch brush. This brush is 12 years old. This is a 1-inch brush that has been worn down. It's been worn into a wedge with a very sharp edge. This new brush is very nice for using it as a mop and applying water. This brush that's been worn now gives me great control. So I can paint with this worn brush, and even possibly with this brand new one. If I'm careful, I can paint areas that most painters would want to use a smaller brush. But I like it because it holds a lot of water and it holds a lot of pigment. I can get a lot of mileage with this brush. I'm going to show you a couple different applications of paint with this brush. One thing you can do is put on a rather heavy wash. Now I'm using watercolor and gouache, American Journey watercolors. And where's that sepia that I had out? I'll put a little bit here. Now if I cared to make this section of this drawing sort of opaque and solid, I can do that, and I'll do it right now with the new brush. I'm going to mix these two watercolors together. This again is sepia and periwinkle, and I can just, I want it in this general area. Apply it somewhat the way you might use oil. I'm also an oil painter, and I use these brushes in my oil paints. Not these very same brushes, but I have Skip brushes just for oil paint and nothing else. So that would be a usual way. Nothing tricky about that. But there's lots of tricks you can do with these brushes. So you see in this area I've used more water, and it's just a bit of tint on this printmaking paper. Over here there's a lot more pigment and a lot more of a matte tone, you could say. Now the other thing you can do, there's lots of things you can do, but one thing I do a lot of is dry brush work. And I usually dry brush over light over dark. That's not a rule by any means. Let's see what happens. Let's put some dark on here, like so. This is a swatch of dark. That's not dry brush, by the way. That's got plenty of water in it. And then let's say I wanted to tone that. And I wanted to tone it, say, with all right, I've lost my knife. I put this white on there to save it. Okay. So I pull that brush dry and mix, in this case white, a little bit of this periwinkle on there. There's no extra water. The brush, of course, was damp. It wasn't totally dry, but I pulled it dry as best I could. And then you can just kind of lightly go across an area like this. This is dry brush. Now let's see what happens if we do that across a color. That color is not dry yet. The dark is not dry. I put paint on my brush and I pulled the wet out of it. And I actually use this brush, I'm hard on my brushes. I use the brush not against the course of the bristle there, so pushing it up, scrubbing it in like this. So let's see what happens if I go across this dark patch. I want to tone it, say, a little bit. Now, honestly, that looks a little bit more like pastel than anything else. And that is the case. Now here I'm just scrubbing it in, scrubbing it. And that gives me a different sort of tone. I'm still using the transparency of watercolor, but using it in a different way. So I've got tan paper, white, and then scrubbed on blue tint. And that, I guess that's what wears my brushes down, but that's fine with me. I mostly use a skipper when I paint. Let's scrub in some darker color now. Let's do it over here. Let's say that this might be a curtain or something. Now I've got sepia on there. Sepia doesn't have much tinting strength, so it is only tinting. It's not doing much more than that. But it's soft and pretty. It looks like pastel. I mean, it looks like gouache in watercolor, but still, that's one way to use it. This is Viridian watercolor. Pulling the brush dry. Loading the brush, so to speak, without water. Scrubbing it in. What does that green look like when it comes across the sepia? Again, I'm going against the natural flow of the bristle. It is toning that sepia into a rich, deep green, sort of. And you can enjoy the transparency here. Paper, Viridian, white Viridian, sepia Viridian. I use these brushes out in the landscape with watercolor and gouache, and you get some very beautiful, subtle variations in your earth tones especially. And I also use it in my figure painting to add light or highlight to an area, and sometimes to add a shadow where the form curves around and I don't want a harsh line.